Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. So what I'm going to talk about today is conversational collaboration. And this is a term that we use within Open Dialogue to describe all the things that an organization needs to do in order to launch positive, successful conversational experiences. And these are things that range from cultural changes, strategic thinking, policy, processes, tools. It's a whole wide range of things. Now, I have two challenges in talking about conversational collaboration. The first one is that it is quite a few things. So if we spend 20 minutes, we would definitely not cover enough of it. And the second one is that there isn't necessarily a single recipe to describe, right? Conversational collaboration is kind of a state that an organization needs to achieve, and there's different paths to get to that. So what I'm going to do instead is I'll tell you 3 stories. And the purpose of each story is to give you a different way of thinking about the issues. And my hope and kind of my promise in terms of you spending time to listen to the stories is that you will then be able to go back to your organization, view your own issues and your own challenges through the perspectives of those stories, and that will spark ideas and about how you can do things in your own organization. Okay. Now, before I do that, let me just briefly talk about who I am. So I consider myself an engineering and product person, first and foremost. I have a background in computer science, and I did a PhD in artificial intelligence. A couple of years ago, I wrote a book called The AI-Powered Workplace, and that talked about how conversational interfaces, artificial intelligence, and data can combine to give us a new type of workplace. I'm the founder at opendialogue.ai. Open Dialogue is a conversational application platform. And I take care of this dog called Gigi, who is as naughty as that picture makes him look cute. If you hear barking in the background, that's his fault, it's not me. Okay, Open Dialogue, for those who haven't heard of it, is a conversational AI platform. It has a very specific, very unique way of helping you think about what are conversational applications, how you can design applications in a way that fully takes into consideration both the user and the application interacting within a specific context. Its sweet spot is when you're looking to design sophisticated multi-turn conversations, and you can do all of this through a no-code designer. And the promise that it makes is that you can create great conversational applications fast, and you can scale them easily. So if you haven't checked out Open Dialogue, head over to opendialogue.ai. Okay, let's get into the talk. So I promised 3 stories. The first one is titled, I guess, Elephants in Dark Rooms, and it's going to be about the importance of shared understanding. Then we're going to talk about space travel and escape velocity, and it's going to be about the importance of setting the right goal. And then we're going to get a bit philosophical and maybe even metaphysical and talk about Plato's cave, and that is about the importance of accurate representation and useful models. Okay, so elephants in the dark. This is I haven't made this story up. This is a story that shows up in lots of different cultures, in a variety of different settings. The one that I'm borrowing from is from a 13th century Persian poet, right? So the story goes something like this. Some people from India bring an elephant to show to a place that's never seen an elephant. And they place this elephant in a dark room. So people from this place go into the dark room one by one, and they come out describing what they've experienced. So the first person goes in, touches the trunk of the elephant, comes out saying, this is a water pipe kind of creature. The second person goes in, touches the ear, and says, oh, this is a very strong, kind of always moving back and forth type of animal, kind of light at the same time. And then the third person goes in and says, I touched something that felt like a column. It's very movable, because obviously they've touched the leg, right? Now, the purpose of this story is to get across the idea that you can be talking about the same thing, but because you're describing it from very different perspectives, it sounds very different, right? And that presents a very specific challenge, especially when you think that your perspective into the problem is a description of the whole, right? So if you come out thinking, well, an elephant is kind of a snake-like creature, or an elephant is kind of a column type thing, that you're not wrong. You're describing what you've experienced, but it's only part of the picture. It's not the whole. Now, in our case and our organizations, conversational AI is that elephant, right? There are lots of different ways to approach the topic of conversational AI. And it's what makes the challenge even bigger for us is that we could even be using the same words, right? But we're still talking about different things. So to give you a more specific example, if you think of a machine learning expert and they're talking about things like learning and evolution potentially and understanding, in their mind, they have graphs and mathematical models and parameters that are changing. From a business perspective, if you hear that you're going to be able to introduce technologies in your organization that can learn and understand and evolve, and you don't have that machine learning grounding, you start developing very different pictures and very different expectations of what that thing is, right? Give you another example, and this is literally about the interaction between the user and the conversational application. So if a conversational application opens a conversation with, hello, how can I help you today? From a user perspective, this feels like an amazingly magical, useful thing. Wow, it could potentially help me with anything. From the application's perspective, it's probably a much more specific, hello, could you please ask me one of the 10 or 20 or 50 things that I know how to help you with? Otherwise, I will not be able to help you, right? So there's different expectations, and we need to be clear about that. We need to recognize that the different descriptions of the thing are not wrong. They're just not a description of the whole and how the different parts connect. And then we have to actively work to bridge those gaps. And I'll give you two ways that we do that within Open Dialogue and in working with our clients, and hopefully you'll find this to be useful for what you're doing. So the first thing is, even before we started building Open Dialogue, we said, we need to come to a common understanding of what are these things that we're building a tool to build them with, right? So what are conversational applications? And we wrote a manifesto. You can go to opendialogue.ai/manifesto, and that gives you our understanding of the elephant, our understanding of what are conversational applications, what is important, what is not important, and how you can go about designing them, right? Now you could adopt this manifesto within your organization, or even better, create your own, have that debate about what is this thing, so that whenever there are questions, you can always refer back to it. The next thing we have, which is really, really practical, and again, you can go on opendialogue.ai to download, is a use case validation template. Right? This is a single PDF, a single page where you can write down what you know about your users and what they are trying to achieve. You can write down the specific business goals and outcomes that the organization wants, connect that to the user journey. So see how those different needs from a user perspective, from a business perspective, are met through the conversational application you're about to build, and then reason about the whole together, right? So again, is a way to bridge that gap once you've recognized that people can have different understandings that are not necessarily wrong, they just need to be connected together. Okay, so that's the first story, elephants in a dark room. Now I'll go to the second story. And this is about space travel, we said, and particularly is around this thing called escape velocity. So I need to give you some context here, some background. So as I was writing the book on the AI-powered workplace, I was thinking about what is an appropriate way to describe the process of building an AI product in general and a conversational AI product more specifically, right? And one of the typical go-to books to read about this is Eric Ries's The Startup Way, right? And kind of the canon in very few words is, start small, fail early, iterate, and then scale fast, right? And that's something that anyone that's been building a product in the digital world has definitely come across. But there was something that was bugging me around this idea of starting small and so on, which is, I think, specific to conversational AI. When you start small, you can prove a point. You can say, oh, look, we can have a conversation, but is it enough? Is it enough? Like, should you be asking, is this a useful conversation? Is this the best way to solve this problem, right? So there was something there that was not quite right for me. Then there's this idea of fail and iterate, which is absolutely necessary no matter what you're doing. But within the automation space, failure has a very particular meaning, and typically failure is very spectacular because we set ourselves up on a pedestal, right? And we talk about intelligence and understanding and all these wonderful things. And then when we fail, we live by the sword, we die by the sword, right? So when we fail, it's not intelligent, it's dumb. And it cannot understand, it's just, it completely fails to meet the expectations. So there was something about that didn't quite work. And then if you think about scaling fast, which again, what organization doesn't want to scale fast? But when it comes to automation and artificial intelligence, scaling needs to also be done appropriately, and you need to worry about unintended consequences and so on. So all of that was in the back of my mind. And I was trying to find some sort of concept that would describe or add to this ideas that will help me better describe what AI projects within an organization need to achieve. And I sat down with my daughter, so I kind of left the book aside and work, and I sat down with my daughter, and she was studying travel to the moon, right? So the first moon landing, and she was kind of looking at the physics of all of it. And we came across this concept of escape velocity, which I thought was really interesting. What is escape velocity? Well, it says if you have a rocket and you want to send that rocket to another planet, the first problem you have is you actually have to escape the planet that you're on. So you're on planet Earth. Planet Earth has gravity that pulls everything back to it, and planet Earth is quite big. So there's a certain velocity you have to achieve so that you can escape the gravitational pull of Earth, and then you can move on to other planets. And that kind of the picture that came into my mind as we're reading about escape velocity is this, right? So you have the Earth in our world is this old digital world, is the way things used to be done, or well, mostly are still done, right? There is at least 20 years, 25 years of knowledge and hard learned lessons about how to do things. And when you introduce a conversational application, one of the first challenges is to prove its worth compared to this old digital world. This world is pulling things back to itself, and your conversational application needs to say, not only can I do something that provides value to the user, but I can do it in a way that is better than what was done before. And that's really important, because if you're not doing it better, even if you're doing something useful, the gravity or the inertia, whatever concept you want to use that means just keeps you where you are, is not going to allow that project to succeed within an organization. And again, let me give you an example. So imagine, the kind of much loved, much hated FAQ bots, right? So you decide, right, we're going to put an FAQ bot on our website, and we're going to go get the FAQ information that is on the actual web pages, pass it through some service, and boom, we can have a nice little bot that answers questions. The first challenge any UX person worth their salt is going to present is, well, why are we even doing this, right? We have an FAQ section. We thought through the information architecture of this FAQ section. We have search, we've tested all of this, we understand it. Why do we need this other thing, right? And that's an example of a conversational application that hasn't defined its escape velocity. It's providing value potentially, but it hasn't defined how that is going to let it break free from the old digital world. And the way you can define value is maybe talking about different channels, right? So you could answer FAQ questions off the website, or instead of just answering the questions and kind of being a glorified search service, you could have conversations with the user to dig a little deeper and understand their real problems and how you can solve those, right? The way I think of it is help the user ask the right question. The point is, as you're building conversational applications, you need to recognize that there is an old world that does things in a certain way, and it's very hard to escape from that world. So you need to define your escape velocity. That's the thing that's going to keep the project alive and going. Okay, so that's the second story. On to the third one now. And this is going to get a bit geekier here, so apologies in advance. So this is called Plato's Cave, and Plato referring to the ancient Greek philosopher. I guess he was hanging out in downtown Athens, as they did, and they were discussing the meaning of life and everything. And they were arguing about what is real, right? And how do you know that what you're experiencing is real? And this is pre-Matrix time, so they couldn't just point to the Matrix films. So Plato came up with this thought experiment. He said, imagine people that are in a cave, never left this cave, and they're constrained in a certain way, and they can only see the wall of the cave. And behind them is the entrance to the cave, and kind of world, the life is taking place behind them, but they can't turn their head and see it, right? They can only see shadows projected on the cave as light that's coming through that entrance is kind of showing the shadows of people moving behind them, right? Now, these people that have never experienced anything else think that that's what the world is, right? It's a set of shadows, and they're interacting between themselves. And they can even start predicting how the shadows are going to behave, right? So you see, well, if one shadow raises an edge, then another shadow raises its edge as well. And if one shadow shows up shortly after, another shadow shows up after this, and this happens repeatedly. So they can build quite good models of what is going to happen next. If one of these people in the cave ever got the chance to experience the real multicolor 3D world, they would be in complete shock, right? This is completely different from the shadows on the cave. They would almost not be able to connect the two. Now, what I find interesting about this thought experiment is that we need to recognize as people that are using artificial intelligence technologies in general, and conversational AI more specifically, that we work with shadows, right? Whether it is machine learning or explicit symbolic representation, we are working with shadows trying to predict what the real world is. And we need to build that into the products that we're using. So the way we react to this open dialogue is we start from a very specific product thesis, right? So we say machines cannot fully learn conversations. They are working with shadows, they're working with reduced information, a projection of the real information onto the walls of a cave, so they cannot fully learn conversations. At the same time, conversational applications cannot be fully designed by humans, right? They're too complicated. So we need models first and tools second that combine human capability, so they really take into account what conversation designers can bring to the table, machine learning automation, and knowledge-driven approaches, so semantics, context handling, and attempt to maximize the value you can get from the combination of all three approaches. And it's only in this sweet spot where the three things combine that you can get really interesting things. So on the back of this product thesis, that's where the open dialogue model comes, right? And it's a very context-centric model of how we view conversations. We say, first of all, there's an overarching scenario, right? You're trying to buy a pair of shoes, you're ordering some pizza, you're going through a support request and so on. There's an overarching scenario, which brings with it its own behaviors and conditions because of that context before there's even any conversation. Then within that scenario, you have different conversations. You're going to welcome the user, they're going to explain their problem, or they're going to provide their preferences and so on. As they're doing that, that conversation splits into scenes, and all these things bring with them behavior and conditions and ways you can treat them. And finally, you have these conversational turns, which are the specific exchanges of requests and response. And this is where intents lead, right? So the key difference between this and an intent first model, where you usually start from, well, what did the user request? Let me provide a response, is you use the conversation designer that actually has a sense of what is the reality. And you use semantic context handling to handle all of that. And then you place specific requests and responses, specific intents within all that context, right? And what's really interesting with this is that you start getting a lot of benefit very quickly with not necessarily that much effort, and you're reducing the request that you're making out of data automation and machine learning. And it's not very hard to think of how different intents within a different set of, to think how the same intent, so for example, the user requesting help within a different conversation or a different scene or a different turn can mean very different things and have very different consequences. So your machine learning model can say, well, the user is requesting help. Your context is the thing that's going to help you understand how to respond to that request. And I'm almost done. The other thing that's really interesting, once you have a model like this, you can start defining all sorts of different conversational patterns, right? These are the types of exchanges that remain true throughout different domains, throughout different interactions. So for example, different ways that you can start a conversation, or different ways that you can authenticate a user and link a pre-existing account, for example, into the conversational application. And if you head over to patterns.opendialogue.ai, you can see a whole set of patterns that we've been documenting, and ways to implement those patterns within Open Dialogue or your tool of choice, right? Okay, so that was our third story, Plato's Cave. So in summary, what were the three stories, right? So we have elephants in dark rooms. This is about recognizing that there are different perspectives. They can all be valid, but we need to be careful not to call them a description of the whole. And we need to proactively look for and bridge gaps. We talked about escape velocity, and this is recognize that we're working in a context that both implicitly, just by kind of the weight of history and existing tooling, and explicitly, because people don't like change, is favoring what is already there, right? And we need to clearly define value and end goal to overcome that gravitational pull. And then finally, with Plato's Cave and the shadows on the cave, we recognize that our tooling is fantastic, but it is a reduced representation of reality. And we require models and tools that will allow us to get the most benefit out of the combination of all the different approaches we have. And why are we doing all this? And I don't need to say this in a chatbot conference in the metaverse, but there is a huge prize at the end of it, right? Achieving conversational collaboration matters. And we talk about all sorts of different digital divides. There's definitely a conversational divide between organizations that are able to automate and scale conversations and those that can't. And the way to automate and scale conversations is first, get your organization in a state where you can have conversational collaboration. Great, thank you very much. I think we have some time for questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you guys have questions, you could put them in the Q&A, or you could raise your hand. And then what we'll do is we'll get to them. And so let's see. Questions. Yeah, if you're putting them in the chat, it's going to be hard for us to look at two places. But what are the most common questions that you get, Ronald, that you would want everyone to know about?
So I think one of the key things here is the path to actually effectively deploying conversational applications. And kind of the biggest challenge, which is typically what organizations will ask, is not necessarily a technological challenge. It is a organizational challenge, right? Shaping the organization in the right way so that they can deal with what is coming, and then they can usefully employ those technologies.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. And I don't think that's something that enough organizations really think about, because I think they just kind of come at it and they think we've done a lot of technology before, we know what we're doing, but this is fundamentally different because it's open-ended.
Absolutely, and that's the thing, right? Introducing automation is not like building just another digital experience. And there is a really good question there about who is the right person inside an organization to push this. And that's something that as Open Dialogue, as a company that provides software to build these experiences, we've grappled with quite a bit, right? And I think there is depending on the organization, you have to either employ a top-down approach, which is you actually need to motivate the board or the CEO or whoever holds the purse strings and makes the decisions that conversational AI is the right strategic direction.
Okay.
And that is then going to open the pathways into providing the resources and time for the rest of the organization to actually start building solutions.
Right. So it's either top down. What would be a bottom up example?
The bottom up example, which as I mentioned, it depends on the type of an organization. But if you do have an organization that decided to already invest in conversational AI, then it's interesting to view it from a bottom up perspective of talking to the people that actually have to implement these things and helping them understand what approaches and tooling and ways to think of it are useful so that they can actually achieve their goal. We see quite a few organizations where they have decided to invest. They've put together teams, but those teams then need to figure out, well, what is the right way to do things? And conversational AI is a new skill, a new discipline. There's so much yet to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. And when it comes to organizations deciding how to implement this, is it sometimes better to hire professionals versus doing it in-house? And then when you're doing it in-house, like to what degree do you have to consider who should lead the team and how your team is made up?
So I think it changes from organization to organization, but my preference would be for an organization to build this capability in-house. Now, there's a journey to get there, right? So you might start with professionals, learn and give, but eventually you have to start viewing this as a core asset of your business. And it's quite similar to web design in many ways, where organizations might, when we started out, everyone was hiring web designers and they thought they were going to do it once and that's it. Right. And then they realized, oh no, this is the thing that keeps happening and it's not going away. So actually we have to build our capabilities.
Yeah, even more so. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for speaking. And I think it's an important topic because like as an organization, if your company's here and you're looking how to implement this technology, like this is not a step you could skip, or if you skip it, it's at your own peril. You really have to think about how you're going to implement it. And so Ronald they have a expo and a booth. So if you want to talk to him, you can go to the expo. It's a very different experience than the booth, but he's available in both. And then tomorrow, Open Dialogue is doing the second half of the conversational design workshop. So in the first half of the conversational design workshop, you're going to learn the theory of design. In the second half, which is the afternoon session, you're going to put it into practice and design a bot. So by the end of the bot, you're going to have like a bot MVP that you could take back to your team. So thank you, Ronald.
Good stuff. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.